This is my second time doing this because the audio got messed up for the first recording. But it's fine. It's fine. We can redo this. Hello, I hope you're doing well. My name is Eric, and today I'll be talking about the white paper protests, which I find to be a very interesting and unique part of modern Chinese history, and just wanted to share it with you all. I am joined here by my trusty white wall, which is quite on brand for the white paper protests, and they just contain images as well as some text that'll hopefully help you understand this video better. So without further ado, let's begin. On November 24th, 2022, an apartment fire broke out in Urumqi, which is a city located in China, and led to the unfortunate deaths of 10 people. And the Urumqi fire, the Chinese public believed that the main reason that 10 people perished in this tragedy is because of the zero COVID policy that the government was enforcing, which was basically a very strict COVID-19 policy that sealed off exits and doorways, which prevented the escape of these 10 people. So in the following days, Chinese citizens across the country in major cities like Beijing and Shanghai took to the streets to perform vigils and mourn the passing of these people. These vigils soon turned into a full-on protest, a full-on movement, and this is now known as the White Paper Protests. We see in China's 1982 constitution that the Chinese people actually have the right to protest against the government, so they were simply exercising their legal rights in this case. However, the government responded by cracking down on the protesters despite them exercising their constitutional rights, and this involved assaulting, beating, and even detaining potential protesters. And this was of clear violation of the Chinese constitution, but I'll get to that later. Overall, the white paper protests were just a very passionate demonstration of public dissatisfaction with the current government, and this all stemmed from the fire that killed 10 people. What makes the white paper protests such an important moment in Chinese history is just how widespread the protest was. So as we know, Chinese society is autocratic, meaning that self-expression as well as any critique against the government is very rare. And the white paper protests was that. It was a critique against the government. So given the how widespread this protest was, it is certainly a commendable event. So let's go back to what caused the white paper protests. One of the first buildups that I'd like to point out is the disappointment or disillusionment with Chinese society. So the Chinese society tends to operate in a meritocratic sense, meaning that through hard work, you should be able to attain success. However, in recent years, this ideal meritocratic society is breaking down due to a number of factors such as ongoing government corruption, environmental degradation, etc., etc. There's still much inequality all across China, and the harsh reality is now that hard work no longer produces success. It no longer pays off. So resentment against the Chinese government and against the Chinese society was relatively high. And now next we have the zero COVID policy. Public opinion towards the zero COVID policy wasn't actually negative to begin with. So the zero COVID policy was a very strict set of guidelines to help prevent the spread of COVID-19 enforced by the Chinese government. And it did prove to be very effective. China saw some of the lowest death rates among all countries inside all over the world. But the main issue with the zero COVID policy was the government's refusal to phase out of it. So with these two factors lined up, the apartment fire was seen as like a breaking point of the Chinese people. But the movement would soon go beyond the apartment fire. It would go beyond the zero COVID policy. It soon evolved into a movement calling for freedom and democracy. But before I get to that, I just want to cover what the white paper in the white paper protests mean. So there's a number of meanings that the white paper can take on. I just have a couple over here. It is supposed to represent all the words that the Chinese citizens want to say, but due to government censorship, they really can't. And examples of the things that the Chinese citizens want to say include their desire for democracy, the anger towards the government, as well as their demands for freedom. However, the government didn't really enjoy the protests as much as I did. They started cracking down on the protesters very quickly. This include assaulting, detaining them, beating them, and just scattering the protests and trying to like dispel it as a whole. All of this is completely a violation of the Chinese constitution, the Chinese 1982 constitution, which states that the Chinese citizens have the freedom to criticize the government, freedom of speech, and the right of demonstration. They're allowed to protest against the government. But clearly the government did not view it as so, given the amount of people they arrested. Now, let's go on to some implications. What does it mean for China as a whole, and what resulted of these protests? So surprisingly, the government actually complied with the requests of the protesters, and the zero COVID policies were rolled back in a couple of days. All of this just goes to show how the government fears such large-scale demonstrations across the country. And it just also shows the power of the people and what they're able and capable of doing if they come together under a united cause. And on that note, I'd like to talk about democracy for a second and how all of this ties into democracy. Now, the White Paper protests can't be considered an entirely democratic movement, but its predecessor, the Tiananmen Square demonstrations of 1989, was. The White Paper protests are a little bit different in a sense that many different people came together and they all had different reasons for protesting. So only some of them held this idea of a more democratic, more free society. So it can't be considered a fully democratic protest. It can only be considered like a partial one. But nonetheless, it just shows that even across generations, the youth still yearn for freedom and they still yearn for democracy. They want to live in a more free society. This is just the Chinese flag, just to show how the Chinese people shape China. So this brings me to the end of my wall. I hope you found something interesting or you learned something from this. I do believe that the White Paper protests are a sign for more to come, and I find it very commendable that the public's opinions and their dissatisfaction was able to sway government opinion. I think the power of the collective is definitely one of the most powerful messages that this movement conveys. That being said, I want to thank you for watching, and yeah, that's all. Bye-bye.